Good afternoon and welcome to the Procurement Rulemaking Advisory Committee. At this time, we are still waiting for a few folks to join us, so we will give attendees about 2 minutes to join before we get started.
Okay.
Welcome, Tiffany. We're just giving folks a few minutes to join in before we get started.
All right. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Do you want us to stay muted during the meeting? Does it?
Stay muted until you have a comment, and then you can come off of mute, and welcome to chat with us.
Perfect. Thanks.
Yeah, of course. Good afternoon, Annalise. Thanks for joining.
No problem. I'm going to stay muted though, because things are pretty loud here still.
Yeah, of course. Okay, just because we have quite a bit of material to walk through, I'm actually going to go ahead and get us started. We do have an interpreter here just because we had someone who indicated they need Spanish interpretation, but this person is not here yet. So to Liz, who is our interpreter today, I'm actually going to just ensure that you are in the interpreter space. And I'm going to set that up just in case she joins. Thanks, Liz. And if anyone else is on the call that does need Spanish interpretation for this meeting, the interpretation channel for Spanish is now open, and you can click on the bottom dots and indicate that you need to be in the interpretation space to access that. And if we do have the person who enters who needs the Spanish interpretation, I will also ensure that she has directions in Spanish to join Liz on the interpretation channel. Going ahead and share my screen again. Welcome everyone again to the Procurement Rulemaking Advisory Committee. My name is Chris O'Grady. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the Legal Affairs Manager here at the Oregon Department of Early Learning and Care. And I am joined today by my colleague who is the lead for procurement at Dell. Lori, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hello, everyone. I am Lori Nordeline, and I am the Procurement Director here at Dell. Very happy to be here.
Thanks so much. Thank you, everyone, for making the time to join this Rulemaking Advisory Committee. This is an exciting time of new rules for the Department of Early Learning and Care. Today, we're going to go over welcome and attendance, which we just did. If you would like to introduce yourself in the chat with your role in the early learning and care system, along with any other additional information, please feel free to put that in the chat. We are going to do a review of group norms. We'll review the Rulemaking Advisory Committee purpose and scope. And then we're actually going to dive into the actual rule language that is in draft right now. And then we will do closing comments and thank yous. So for group norms today within our Rulemaking Advisory Committee, we really want to ensure and let folks know that these rules have been drafted with an equity-driven perspective and approach. that we are here to center children, families, and early learning professionals in this space and in the rules that we're discussing for their intent. We encourage you to stay curious and welcome other points of view, to seek first to understand and then seek to be understood, to stay present. Feel free to put yourself on or off of mute to be present in the conversation, or if you need to turn off your video at any time or turn it on, you are free to do that, but we do want you to engage with us here today. To be impeccable and respectful with your words, each one of us on this rulemaking advisory committee has a unique aspect and role to play within the system. And so it's important that we all respect each other and the knowledge that we bring to this space. And within that, to be aware of the power and privilege that you have within this group. And then our commitment to you is that we will start and stop on time. We know that you have very, very busy schedules and are often interacting with parents and families and have a tight schedule to stick to. Any questions or comments on the group norms for today? Great. All right, so the first thing that we wanted to do is really ground the Rulemaking Advisory Committee on the principles of why we are bringing forward these proposed rules on procurement. And these principles are informed by all of the community engagement that we've done on our strategic plan and through all of our programs throughout the years, and the feedback that we've heard from the field and from providers that interact with our procurement office and get grants and contracts from us. The first one is for efficiency. We want to have uniform procurement rules across the Oregon Department of Early Learning and Care, because this makes it more clear to grantees and contractors on the applicable policies and procedures. We also want to ensure that there's alignment and streamlining across our contracts and grants to make it easier for providers to receive funding and parents to receive services. We also really want to elevate accountability within our rule set to create transparency on the procurement process and our DELC organizational policies and how we move forward with procurement. I know that procurement can often be a really dry process, but we did as much as we could, Lori and I, to make it accessible within the language that we had while conforming to some legal principles that we have to within the state of Oregon. And then really to elevate equity, to allow flexibility to adjust our grant cycles by program and funding cycles to fit providers' needs. In 2023, we actually went through a process where we repealed some program rules that were applicable to specific programs and within their sets that were really constrictive. And this is us bringing our procurement processes forward within this proposed set of rules so you can see the flexibility and adjustment across all of our program and funding streams to fit the needs of those programs and providers and families for services. Lori, anything to add on the principles here?
No, I don't think so. I think you covered it very well.
Thanks, Lori. And then just a little bit of history and background around why we will have all of the procurement rules that we're going over in draft form today is there's actually a legislative requirement that we have these rules as an agency and that we abide by certain rules within the procurement process. And you can see them outlined in ORS 279A, B, and C. There are some other documents we also had to rely on in creating our policy as an agency, and these give statewide procurement guidance. So there are areas that we have flexibility, but there are some areas that we don't have as much flexibility. So within our rules, we are ensuring that we are complying with DAS statewide policy. So DAS is the Department of Administrative Services, and they have policies for all state agencies to follow. So we ensure that we are following those policies. We also have to follow the Oregon Administrative Rules, Chapter 125 and 137. These are rules set out by the Attorney General on the procurement process and the authority that we have there too. So our rule sets have to fit within that rule structure. We also abide by the Oregon Accounting Manual and other chapters of Oregon statute that direct procurement in the state, including ORS 190A and ORS 200. Some of the tools that we use internally at the agency, in addition to some of the draft rules that you'll see today, are a procurement manual, procurement tools and templates, and a Department of Administrative Services procurement training. So all staff actually that do procurement actually have to go through this training to be able to do their jobs for the department. And the need for this change is that the Oregon Department of Early Learning and Care became an agency on July 1st of 2023. And our agency has a little bit of different procurement policies and procedures from those outlined in the model rules. So we wanted to be as transparent as possible with members of the public and put them within our rule set so you could see our procurement processes. Any questions on the history or background or purpose of why we're bringing these rules forward?
Can I ask, this is Annalise, can I ask one quick question?
Yep.
When y'all wrote these rules, are they basically, they seem to be modeled off of what Department of Ed and other agencies use already?
So we actually used the model rules from the Attorney General as our base because we have to follow those rules. And so you'll see many other agencies like the Oregon Department of Education also use these model rules as a base. But there are some areas that actually aren't applicable to the work that we do. So we removed some of that and then adjusted some of the rules to more accurately state what Lori's role as the lead of procurement for the department is compared to some other agencies. But yes, if you see other agency rules, you will see that they are very, very similar. Any other questions or comments here? Okay. Now we're going to give you an overview of just what the titles of the rules are before we actually bring up the language, because it can be pretty overwhelming to look at the language just first. So we have a rule on the policies for procurement. We have one on our procurement authority. We have one on the delegation of authority. So that means who within our agency has the authority to do what within the procurement office. We have a rule that outlines the electronic procurement system that we use as the state, and that's called Oregon Buys. We also have a rule on our buy decisions and methods of source selection. So methods of source is like who is bringing this forward as the source of services that are being provided. We also have a rule on contract administration and general provisions and what we have to do as an agency in contract administration and what that looks like. We have another rule on the procurement files and files that we have within procurement. Another rule in the reinstatement of expired contracts and the retroactive approval of existing contracts when we can't do that and some of the confines and parameters around that. We also have a rule that is structured around ORS 190 agreements. So these are intergovernmental agreements, and these would be instances when we have a government to government agreement with a tribal nation per se, or a county government or a city government. And there are some times that we have them within the system. So this rule would outline that. We also have one on sole source procurements. So that means when there's only one source of that procurement, and we know we're going to buy from. We have another one on brand name or equal specification, fragmentation, selling or leasing supplies and services, the policy applicability and methods, the feasibility determination, cost analysis, and department report, our practices regarding electronic goods procurement, things like data systems and things like that, life cycle costing, approval of information technology or telecommunications procurements. And then we have rules and ethics in public contracting and policy and specifications. Any question on kind of how our rules here are framed within procurement? And Lori, did you want to add anything here just on framing?
No, I don't think so. No, I think you covered it.
Thanks, Lori. All right. I'm going to switch my screen now because we'll actually go over the exact language, and we're going to do this rule by rule. So if there is a rule within language that you have questions on and you want to go through, just stop me because I'm going to be scrolling and moving through them. Okay. Can folks see my screen? Okay. So this rule 414-070-0000 is on our policies. This outlines what policies that we have, the foundation and why we have procurement policies, and really what clarifies the intent here. You can see here that it sets forth the goals for the state of Oregon regarding sustainability and what objectives we're trying to meet there. How this rule identifies and implements each of the legislatively mandated socioeconomic programs that are identified in statute, how we arrive at best value, any questions or comments on the language within this rule? Keep going then. The next rule is 414-070-0005, which is our procurement authority rule. And here you can see that these are rules that we are adopting to supplement the DOJ model rules on the general provisions. And these rules are just meant to supplement those rules, but not come into conflict on them, and just give the members of the public some additional clarification on how our policies as a department might be a little bit different than the model rules. This also states how we have to conduct procurements and administer contracting for supplies and services, as well as the particular areas. Clarifies the department and the director or the contracting agency via the code. And how we have authority to do our procurements. Here you can see too, we have the education, training, and professional experience.
Question on that one. So is there in that one, so say for instance, if you're doing one for preschool promise, if staff does not meet that though, is there a contingency in there for them to be on a plan? Because I don't read it in that. So are you saying that every contract, everyone has to meet it exactly, or even for like CCR&R, if I don't have all my QIS at a step 10, I can't put them on a plan to get there?
So this is for our department staff who are conducting procurements. So
Okay,
the training that Lori's staff will have to have.
got it. Sorry.
No,
I
that's
thought it
okay.
was for the contracts and I'm like, oh.
Okay.
No, these are more of what we have to do internally. So if you've ever worked with our staff in refining scopes of work and statements of work, our staff actually have to have training on how to do that to meet legal sufficiency standards and to ensure they know what the insurance requirements are. So when there's that back and forth, they're actually coming from an informed place. Any additional comments or questions on this rule? All right, the next one, 414-070-0010 is on our delegation of authority. And we actually have to have authority from the executive branch to do, like as an agency within the executive branch, to do procurements. So this is what gives our agency and Lori and Lori's team the authority to do what they do, and which statute allows us to do this and enter into a contract for services like providers within preschool promise and with our childcare and resource referrals. Outlines what the authority of the director is. So this is Alyssa Chatterjee as of right now, and what her authority is, and what the delegation to individuals in the department is, and how Alyssa right now, the director, would delegate authority to the designated procurement director, which is currently Lori, and hopefully for a very long time to be Lori. This also outlines the duties and responsibilities of that procurement director and how they oversee procurement within the department. That there's a duty to prepare and monitor specifications and statements of work. So how Lori is overlooking the work of her staff and her team and ensuring that we're complying with this rule and executing contracts. Conducting cost analyses and feasibility determinations and exceptions. Sorry, y'all, today is a Monday. The differences of delegation by thresholds, if it's a small procurement, and what that threshold is in terms of funding. Supplies and services greater than 25,000, but not exceeding 250,000. Talks about amendments, competitive costs, and what we have to do within certain procurements that fit definitions and certain dollar amounts. Also goes into special procurements. For certain procurements, we also have to do contract administration as outlined by the Department of Administrative Services price agreements. So this just talks a little bit about what those price agreements are. when we can do amendments. Also talks about emergency procurements. Federal program procurements. Brand name and buy decisions. How guidance is provided to leadership. Gives us the authority to appoint procurement advisory committees. Any questions or comments on this rule? Scroll through to the next one. Okay, this one, 414-070-0100, is on the electronic procurement system, or Oregon Buys. And it just describes what Oregon Buys is. And that it's the official publication forum for state procurement notices and advertisements. So if we have a procurement that goes out, it has to be advertised here through Oregon Buys. Give some of the statutory requirements and what procurements need to be posted there. And that we have to give timely notice for bids and awards. Any questions or comments on this rule? This next one, 414-070-0200, is on our buy decision and methods of source selection. This is when we don't have to make a buy decision based on the lowest price, that we can see the specific law for each source. That we have a priority order. And that we have to follow that priority order and source. This rule also talks about those statewide Department of Administrative Services price agreements. And that we have to follow those. This is when we can use intergovernmental agreements, and when this isn't attached to that requirements. This gives the option to do that. This allows us to procure supplies and services through the open market, through the public contracting code. It also outlines the methods of source selection. The competitive sealed bidding, competitive sealed proposals, small procurement, intermediate procurement, sole source procurement, emergency procurement, and special procurement.
So what specifically would be an emergency procurement?
The emergency procurement would be established by the director of the agency. Let's say for Delk, some emergency took place and one of our systems went down. So in an emergency like that, we don't have to go through these source selections. We can go and do a direct award with somebody who can come in and fix what's wrong.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Any additional questions or comments here? Okay, moving on to the next one. To 414-070-0300 for contract administration and general provisions. This talks about the authority for us to do contract administration, who a contract administrator is, and that's that designated person, and that's in writing. So if you ever have a grant or contract with the Oregon Department of Early Learning and Care, the contract administrator is listed there, and they're the representative of the department for each one of those contracts, because they do the specific day-to-day administrative activities for that and monitoring. So if you are a CCR in our entity that has a grant or contract with the department, you likely have a contract administrator that you work with on a pretty regular basis that will review scope of work. If there needs any amendments to the scope of work, your contract administrator is usually your first point of contact here. And this just talks about the general provisions of that requirement. Any questions or comments here? And Lori, feel free to jump in if you want to steer the ship a little more. 414-070-0310 is on procurement files. And this is just on the required documentation for procurement files to make sure that we have this. Everything that we do as a state agency, as a matter of government, is subject to public record, and it's really important that we keep accurate files, especially within our procurements. So this rule just talks about what is included in those procurement files, like our executed contract, the record of actions used to develop and administer the contract, a copy of the solicitation, if any. If there's ever a finding or statement for the selection of the provider and the sourcing method chosen and why. Contract administration. So if you work with your contract administrator on giving certain reports, those should be in the procurement files as well. Common things that we have within the department are just ensuring that you are adhering to the scope of work in the contract. And then it talks about how long we have to keep these procurement files available in accordance with other records retention on the state level. Any questions or comments here? I know this is heavy language because it's procurement, but I appreciate you all going through this. All right, the next one is 414-070-0320 on the reinstatement of expired contract or retroactive approval of existing contract. So this is when we need to, as a department, reinstate its expired or terminated contract or do retroactive approval for supplies and services. This isn't meant to cover mistakes in the solicitation process and just covers that.
So another question on this one, sorry. So with this one, if you are looking at a contract that for some reason was terminated by either side, are there rules in here about, so when we're talking about reinstating, is it specifically back with that particular entity, or is there something in here about how to open it up to other entities?
No, this is specifically for the reinstatement of a certain contract. So let's say it's between Dell and an office supply company, and we've decided to cancel that contract for whatever reason, and 6 months later, we say, oh, we wish we wouldn't have done that, so then we would do a reinstatement of that contract, as long as the vendor is willing to reinstate it.
Got it. Okay.
Let's say the vendor didn't want the contract anymore, and we said, okay. And then the contractor comes back and says, hey, do you still need these services? Because we'd like to get that contract back. And if it's in a certain period of time, like 1 year or less, you bet, we can do that.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
So this talks about the process here, as Lori gave a nod to, and what we would need to do and what we would need to explain in that request and the proposed reinstatement. And that it's made on a good faith basis. That again, we'd have to go through the legal sufficiency process. That we can only make a payment after any related contract documents are signed by the parties. And if there's amendments to a reinstated contract, what needs to be met? Any other questions or comments here? Okay. 414-070-0330 is on ORS 190 agreements. These are the intergovernmental agreements. This what gives us the authority to enter in those. What needs to be included. The specific call out for tribal governments here. What needs to be included in interagency and intergovernmental agreements. So for instance, we have an interagency agreement with the Oregon Department of Human Services on the implementation and continued administration of the employment-related daycare program. So this rule would talk about and what gives us the authority to do that interagency agreement with ODHS. And that these would be subject to review and approval by the Attorney General. Any questions or comments on this one? Okay. And just as a reminder, if you are we're working through this language and you don't have comments now, we will have the public comment period open until the end of the month. So this one is 414-070-0340 on sole source procurements. The requirements of when we make a determination of a sole source based on written findings of fact that the supplies and services are available from only one source. So those are things that we need to do as a department to make that justification. And what the findings of fact may include. Whether it's a pilot or experimental project, market research. The limitation on the amount for sole source procurements. How we even when we do a sole source procurement, we still place a public notice on Oregon buys or on other procurement system, how we describe that, the amount of time that we have to have that up. and what we do if there's any protest. And that these are also subject to legal sufficiency review by the Attorney General. Any questions or comments here? Okay. The next is 414-070-0350, brand name or equal specification. When we would do this, when it's advantageous to the department, and why. Some of the limitations here. And things that we need to comply with. Lori, do you have any examples of what a brand name or equal specification would be?
Yeah, let me think. Like in IT related, you want to use one manufacturer over another. Let's say it's a Dell computer. And you want that brand name specification to say that I want my agency to only have Dell computers. So you have to say why, what is the reason that it's a brand name of Dell? Is it because it performs better somewhere? Or what is the reason?
Any questions or comments on this rule? Move on to the next. 414-070-0360 is just on fragmentation, talking about how a procurement may not be artificially divided or fragmented so that it would constitute a small procurement an immediate one. So this would be in instances where a procurement is artificially taken apart into pieces so that it's subject to lower levels of scrutiny or the procurement process. This is really a more of like a transparency and accountability mechanism on us as a department, so that we're not breaking up what should be a larger procurement process. Any questions or comments here? Okay. Right. The next 414-070-0370 is on selling or leasing supplies and services, the policy applicability and methods. So when it applies here.
And an example of maybe something to lease would be maybe something in a data center, like you want to lease a big, huge piece of equipment, and it's more advantageous monetarily to lease it rather than to just put up the money to buy it. So I just wanted to give an example there.
Thank you for jumping in, because I would not have been able to give an example here. Any questions or comments? Okay. The next one is 414-070-0380. This outlines our feasibility determinations, our cost analysis, and our department reports.
And the feasibility determination is over a certain amount. Hold on for just a second.
Yep.
Anyway, on the feasibility determination, this has to do with whether you have the services performed in-house by an employee of your agency, or if you want to go outside and hire somebody to do that work. You've got to have a detailed feasibility determination of why you cannot do that in-house.
This just outlines the process and personnel needed to do there and approvals and who can do those approvals for which types of agreement. The funding requirement. And then this, for different types of procurement, says what laws or rules apply there. And some of the associated cost with those services. And what can be included in those related costs or should be excluded. Questions and comments on this one? I know this is pretty complicated and thorough. Okay. This is really just about the process of when that happens. 414-070-0390 is on practices regarding electronic goods procurement. Talking about that we have to have this to ensure the maximum extent economically feasible. They might be recycled, reused, or reused when discarded. This is more for those like sustainability, environmental practices. And for public health. Any questions or comments on this one? The next one, 414-070-0400, is on life cycle costing. The first part just gives the policy on life cycle costing and explains that it's a method of analysis considering sustainability and analyzing the total cost of ownership as the best value of purchased goods that we are going out through for solicitation for the department. That we don't have to take the lowest bid. We can also include life cycle costing, what planning we need to do here, the service is related to the product. This also goes over the definitions here as are used throughout the rule and applied. Go ahead.
It's known as like a total cost of ownership. You're trying to decide.
So these are just things that would be and could be included. Any questions or comments on this one? Okay, we're getting to the end. 414-070-0410 is on the approval of information technology or telecommunications procurements. And this places when there's contract rates. And when we need approval, go ahead, Lori.
Oh, this has to do with our state CIO office. And so anything on IT procurements that is $1 million or more, they are going to have oversight on what we are doing. They're going to be looking at the process of how we obtain our vendors. They're going to be looking at our contract documents and approving them. And that's what this is talking about here.
And our CIO is the Chief Information Officer.
I'm sorry, yes.
Oh, no worries. Any questions or comments here? This one, 414-070-0420, is our ethics and public contracting policy. And that our Oregon Public Contracting is a public trust. We are carrying out actions with taxpayer dollars, and that we have to follow these policies as a safeguard for public trust because we are a steward of public funds. Any questions or comments here? Last one. The last one, 414-070-0430, is on specifications. And this really is just ensuring that we're not developing specifications that are unfair, unequal, that only benefit a certain provider either directly or indirectly to the detriment of the department or the best interest of the state. Any comments or questions on this one? I know that was a lot of information to go through on procurement, and it's primarily the role and rules on saying what we should do as an agency on procurement. So I know that folks had some questions on the procurement process itself, and you may have additional comments on the rules as we move forward, but I also wanted to open the space if you just had general comments on the procurement process or how we conduct procurements in your role of how you've interacted with the Oregon Department of Early Learning and Care that you wanted to elevate now that might not be reflected in the rules.
Well, if nobody else is going to say anything, Chris, this is Annalise. One, I want to thank you for putting the rule language in the email that you sent to us because it was super helpful for me to be able to read it ahead of time and decide that I didn't have any questions or really any comments. And then number two, I mean, I think that historically, Early Learning Division and now DELC seem to do this very well, even without the rules in place. I think the only issues that I've ever had with, or that our union has ever had with procurement is the things that happen before DELC or Early Learning Division got control of the funds, right? It was the stuff that happened before we were working with DELC, right? So drawing down that money and actually getting it deposited with DELC so that DELC can start spending it, which you guys don't have any control over and these rules aren't going to cover. So now I think this all this language looks very familiar, which is why I asked that question at the beginning. And I think y'all have done a pretty good job of cleaning that up to be specific to DELC. And I mean, looks good. So good work, guys, ladies.
Thanks,
Thank
Annalise.
I think one, and I don't know how or where it would go in that, or if it even would. So if this is something that's somewhere else, but one concern that we have in our region is it's specific to preschool promise, but in general, if we had providers who did not end up taking their slots or did not end up taking the contract, the reallocation of those back out. Is that we've always been told that it was an issue with procurement, that there wasn't a way to redistribute those.
Yeah. So what we're doing on that is we released an reallocation RFA last Friday for preschool promise, and that is released by hub, and it will tell you what slots are available by hub. But for the first time, we also on this RFA reallocation, we've got a waiting list. And what that waiting list is, if you don't have room now, but you may have room later, you're going to get qualified and put on this waiting list so that we don't have to go through the reallocations anymore. So after this one's done, let's say there's 3 months that go by and now all of a sudden Hub X has some slots. Well, they're going to take the list there of the waiting list. We're going to re-verify everything and then hand out the slots.
Yeah, which we appreciate, because when we had one closed down and people just absorbed those kids and didn't get paid for them, and that was not, thankfully they were able to, but yeah. Okay, thank you.
Well,
But thanks for elevating that, Teresa. Tiffany or Jesse, anything that you want to elevate?
Nothing from my end.
There we go. I was trying to get to my unmute. No, this is my first time participating in this process, and I just appreciate getting out and inviting providers to participate and to learn more about the state level processes.
Well, thank you so much for coming. I'm just going to bring up a slide for reminders here. So today is our RAC meeting. We will have a public hearing on our procurement rules on May 22nd from 5 to 6 p.m. We aren't able to have a back and forth conversation at our public hearing. This is a time for us to just take verbal comment. So if you want to come to that, you are more than welcome. We will also be accepting public comment in writing until May 31st at 5 p.m. This is supposed to say the procurement rules. They will be presented to the Early Learning Council on May 22nd, and then will be voted on by the Early Learning Council on June 26th of 2024. So if you are interested, and I just wanted to say thank you so much for joining us. We know that this procurement topic is a more technical aspect of our work, and these rules really have to do with what we are doing as an agency, but it's really important for us to be transparent on the process so you know how we go about our procurements, and want to welcome you to apply to future rulemaking advisory committees in the future. Thank you all for being